Hi there, I'm Katie Smalley. I am the president of the Brewston-Brennanville Volunteer Fire Department Auxiliary, and I am here today with Adam Hoffman, the chief of Brewston-Brennanville Volunteer Fire Department. And he has agreed to do a couple leadership-focused podcasts with me as a mini-series, where we're going to highlight a few different attributes and theories surrounding leadership and how they apply in the volunteer fire department industry. So, Adam, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
First, thanks for having me. My name's Adam Hoffman. I'm currently serving as the chief of the Brewston-Brennanville Volunteer Fire Department. I am in my 21st year in the fire service. I also serve as a paramedic and rescue technician. So,
And that's an elected position, right?
correct. So our line officers, as we call them, our operational officers and leaders are elected by our firemen.
Great. And my position is also elected. It's a different structure. Obviously, Adam's in charge of the operations here. And I am in charge of more of the fundraising type things, the volunteerism, and different events that we put on here at the department to keep the doors open and to keep the guys operating and functioning safely for our community. So, what we're going to highlight on this episode today, we want to talk a little bit about the skills approach to leadership. So, unlike the trait approach to leadership, this theory discusses more about how you can become a leader. You're not necessarily born one, and so that you can practice these skills. And actually, in the United States, I think we spend about 14 billion, I don't know, some very large number on training leadership and having leadership classes. So there's got to be something to this, you know. So I want to focus on specifically a theory by Mumford and colleagues. It was developed in 2000, so it's a relatively recent model. And basically, it discusses the skills approach in a way that your career experiences give you you have individual attributes, and then you also have competencies that you gain and learn through your career. And in the individual attributes, it talks about your knowledge, your IQ, which you're born with, versus skills that you learn, that you pick up, and your personality, and also your motivation. So I really wanted to talk about motivation because this department is a volunteer department, and motivation is something that everybody has to have. They have to come in with it. So I was wondering, Adam, what motivates you, number one, to get into this industry and the service, and also to become the chief?
So that's a great question, and I think I want to preface that or start with that has changed for me and for the guys and gals that I lead. I see that change over time. So we see a lot of, kind of classically, you see young 16, 18-year-old men come into the fire department, very much adrenaline seeking. They want a sense of brotherhood, and they love the excitement of fighting fires and cutting up cars and getting to break stuff, legally and even in some instances in the paid service getting paid for it, right? And so, that's where a lot of our guys start. And I'm sure I started the same way, right? That's pretty classic 18-year-old guy come in here or in any fire department and really like the excitement and the adrenaline of it all. As I've gotten older, my motivation has changed a lot in that that doesn't last, right? I found by about the time I was 25 or so, that need or even the want or enjoyment of that adrenaline rush is just gone. I don't like it anymore. It's not. I'm certainly not in it for that, and I think that fades pretty quickly to the reality of what we're doing and the job we're doing. It's way more than that. That's how we get young men in the door, but that's not what keeps them here. So I think over time that has changed for me in a helping the community kind of way and fulfilling a purpose in my life, as well as a brotherhood with my fellow firemen here. But that's a great question because I think motivation is a big factor, especially in the volunteer fire service. We're seeing declining numbers across the country of volunteer firemen, and I think a lot of that has to do with But I think it's multifactorial. But I think one of those issues is motivation. We don't have the same sense of community and the same sense of helping our neighbors that we had maybe 50 years ago when, the volunteer fire service was, more healthily staffed. Might be a good way to say that. To answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you said it's difficult to find motivated folks to join. So once you get them, you snag them and get their foot in the door, be it from talking to them in the community, or maybe they're just interested in being a firefighter. So how do you, once you get them here, how do you keep them motivated?
Gosh, that's $1 million question, right? And I wish I had all the answers to
I'm
that
trying to figure
because
that
we
one out
don't. It's not that simple, right?
Sure.
And we've seen. I find an interesting trend over firemen's lives. They 16, 18, they're here every night, they're here on every call, really active, very busy. And then they get girlfriends and wives, and they start to not come around quite as much. And then they get kids, and they really can't come around a whole lot. And I think a lot of that's time and money related, right? And then as their kids get a little older, you see them kind of start to come back into the fire service. They've already had the training and all of that. But I think that does vary with life cycle. But keeping folks is equally difficult, right? And it's actually, I think, harder to retain than it is to recruit, especially if you're recruiting, 16, 18-year-old boys, and you're like, hey, you ride a fire truck. And they're all like, yeah, of course, I'd love to do that. But retaining them is a different thing. And you have to find a different motivation and reason to be here, whether it be helping the community or the brotherhood of the fire service, or motivation to take on leadership opportunities, something like that.
So this is a nice segue into the other piece of this skills approach, which is competencies. And you said, and I want to touch back on this, you said how motivation changes over time, and I want to loop that back around later so don't make forget. But alongside just like what you're saying, things that motivate people, including like, oh, might as well come back around because I have the knowledge, I took the class, or this in the competencies they talk about social judgment and social skills. So you have the brotherhood, you have those things, and you'd assume that the competencies and skills are growing over time here. And I wanted to especially highlight in this industry, one of the competencies is problem solving skills, and that's something you guys aren't short on, is it?
No, yeah. So talk a little bit about that. I personally subscribe to the skills approach to leadership because I've met very few true natural born leaders. Some people are better leaders than others, but an Elon Musk, a John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, like those, really charismatic natural leaders. Those are kind of once in a generation people, and those people are very quickly, leaders of Twitter and Tesla, right? Not Bruce and Brandonville Volunteer Fire
That's
Department,
true.
right?
That's true.
And so we don't. We have to train our leaders here, and a skills based, a competency based approach is not only desired but required in the fire service, and that may not be true or applicable for every industry, but I wouldn't be the chief if I wasn't technically competent. So that it has to start there as a fireman, and then as an officer, as a junior officer, I have to be technically competent in my leadership ability, and that's a skill set and a skill set and a competency as well. So I have to know the dynamics of my industry, the dynamics of firefighting, and then to your problem solving, that's one thing that the fire service does extremely well. We joke that the public expects 5 decathlon champion neurosurgeons to show up in 5 minutes and solve all their problems, and it's only half a joke because that is what we do here. I can't run any decathlons, so please don't invite me. But
Me either.
that is what we do here, though, is problem solve. And every problem, in every fire, every rescue situation, every entrapment is different. And so we have folks that I think that's actually one of the things that keeps people interested here is the technical complexity of the job itself, right? And that is a retention thing. And as you get older, for me, as I got older, I should say, that became something I really enjoyed. Figuring out the problem, solving the puzzle. of how to get somebody out of a building or a car, how to put the fire out, how to stabilize this or move that. And so that is absolutely part of this. And without now, that being said, there's no way for you to be a technical expert in everything we do here. It's just not possible, right? And so we do all have our strengths and our weaknesses, but there is a base level of technical competence that that I expect and require of our firemen. There's a different level of competence that I expect and require of our junior officers, and a technical level of competence that I expect of our senior officers, both in technical skills, but also in the leadership realm when you get into senior firemen and officers.
Right. And of course, I think that the skills approach is also interesting because other leaders of other organizations can't just come in and run operations at a fire department. That's definitely a technical piece. The skill is, I couldn't come in as the leader of the auxiliary and all of a sudden take over as chief. That just would never happen.
Yeah.
And that's mostly because I don't have the technical skills for that. I may have other leadership qualities in my realm that, involve emotional intelligence and listening to my people and kind of guiding them and growing them. But and you do that too, but there's this other piece, I think, to the skills approach that makes it more interesting. And that actually leads us into, so the leadership outcomes of the skills approach is problem solving. So, someone who's looking at things from a higher level, seeing things, your guys might be in a fire and you might see something that they don't necessarily see because that they're doing one job at the time and you're trying to look at it from all the angles and try to keep them safe. And then that lands up being hand in hand with performance. So problem solving that leads to, good performance or
so let's talk about that for just a second, because I think you've hit on an interesting thing that we discuss in fire and EMS both, being task oriented versus tactics oriented. One of the big rules for the chief, and my guys yell at me all the time, is that I'm not allowed to touch stuff. I'm not allowed to do stuff. I'm not allowed to pick up an axe.
I've heard it.
I'm not allowed to use a hose. And that's a really important rule. And what happens is that when you're in a leadership role and you become task focused, you become task saturated with, I'm breaking this door down, or I'm cutting this roof, or I'm spraying this hose. I'm focused on this hose and I'm not seeing the larger picture. And so, it's actually really important that we teach and generate and maintain a tactic-oriented mindset as the leadership, and instead of a task-saturated or task-oriented mindset. And so that's actually one thing that we do absolutely teach as a skill for our leaders. No, I know it's tempting. I know you want to go fight that fire, but you can't, because you have to see the larger picture. And I think that speaks to a larger leadership concept of being vision-oriented, not detail-oriented as a leader.
And
right?
I was actually just going to bring that up in the CATS model, which is a much older model from the 1950s. They discuss how at first you are more technical. Everybody has to be socially in tune at all levels of leadership and membership. But when you start out as followers or members, you have to be more technically in tuned. And then once you get up to the leadership role, then you have to be more conceptual, just like you said. And that follows exactly what Katz described. And I think,
and I think you see that fall apart in a lot of companies. If it's the startup company is a great example, right? If you have, an entrepreneurial mindset that is very growth task oriented, right? And you have a person who might even be a pretty great natural leader. If they build this company from the bottom up, there becomes a point where the company becomes too big and they can't separate themselves from the task of the technical side of the business. And you see them either collapse the business or are ultimately forced to sell to a larger company because they can't remove themselves from the task-oriented piece, which is what made them a great entrepreneur, but it doesn't necessarily make them great at the leadership role. And so I think that's an interesting dynamic too. And that is definitely something that is applicable to the broader world. You see this a lot. Folks that come out of the military as officers, senior officers, right? Captains, majors, generals, they immediately can go into a field and take on a leadership role and in a field if they have some technical competence. But even your senior non-commissioned officers, because they have that, they've gotten that the practice and experience of remaining conceptually oriented, tactic, or as we call it here, tactically oriented instead of
Right.
task oriented.
Right. It's a bigger
And that
picture type.
right, and so that it's a way of conceptualizing and thinking about the world, and it takes, but it is a skill you can learn. It's not something that you're born with or not
Sure.
born
You
with,
actually
right?
have to
You
grow
you can
that.
grow that, and I think most people necessarily are task oriented because that's how we learn from being a small
Everything.
child, right?
That's how you learn everything.
And it's how you learn in the beginning stages of your career in
natural.
any
Yeah,
field.
it makes
You
sense.
have to learn the technical side, the competency side of whatever you're doing before you can move to the conceptual side. So, that is definitely a learned skill or a grown skill. Some people are better at it naturally than others,
Sure.
but it is definitely a grown skill.
And I think it's poignant to note that Adam and I are both, I would say we both consider ourselves servant leaders. So we have a hard time disconnecting sometimes from the technical because we want to be down there with our people, in the mud, doing the dishes, fighting the fire, doing some of the dirty jobs because we're not above that. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I've seen it, and we're not above doing the odd jobs that need to be done because they need to be done. But like you said, at the end of the day, when you're in a critical performance type situation when we're examining this theory, you want to be able to come in as the leader and look at those conceptual things rather than.
And I think both of that's important, right? So this goes to relating to your people and orienting yourself correctly in your role in the organization. And as a servant leader, naturally, that's how I would probably describe myself naturally in my leadership style. I do want to be doing the things, but I have to know when to do that and when not to do that, right?
Right.
Doing the dishes at a fundraiser is way different than
In your operations role,
becoming
yeah.
task saturated in an operations environment. So in a high risk environment. So,
Sure.
I have to know when is appropriate for me to pick up the broom and sweep the floor,
Right.
and when is it, hey, I'm going to stand back here with my radio and get made fun of for having the cleanest gear in the department, and that's fine, right? But that's the whole point of that. And so I think good leaders know when to sweep the floor, when to push the mop, and when to remain focused on the larger environment, whether it's a business environment or an operational environment like a fire
Sure.
department.
Yeah, which we have a lot of both. So then I just want to touch in the end here briefly about the strengths and criticisms of this theory. And one of the strengths that I really thought was applicable here was that the trait theory kind of gives way to training your replacement. So this allows you to look at your membership, look at your followers, see who's interested, who is motivated, who wants that leadership role, who is influential, and grow those in a way that jives with the vision and your influence in the organization, and kind of just grow them to perpetuate, the positive and to make their own choices in the future.
Yeah, and a wise man once told me, Troy, if you ever see this, that the second you take a job, you should be training your replacement. And in the fire service, I think that's especially true. You should always be working the people below you, whether you're, even if you've got, a year on the job, you get a new probie in, he doesn't have a year on the job, you can be training him to take your spot, right? And teaching him what you know. And as a chief, then I need to be teaching my officers what I know so that, when it's time for me to move on and do something different, or, God forbid something bad happens to me, the whole thing doesn't fall down on its head, right?
Right.
But also, good leadership skills. And I think this really is speaking to both the technical competence, but also the leadership skills. If you're training your replacement, there's no harm in having too many people with good leadership skills in your organization.
Absolutely.
Right?
I couldn't agree more.
You can't have, you can have too many leaders, but you can't have too many skills. You can't have people
Sure.
with too many people with skills, right?
Good developed skills.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, the sooner you start teaching leadership skills to your younger folks, to your newer folks, to your junior officers, the more you start involving them and showing them what you're doing, how you're doing it, and some of that's by example, and just being around, and some of it is like directly imposed. Some of it is creating a plan for your people. So I have a senior fireman or somebody who's kind of in the middle, and is going to start to work towards a promotion, towards an officer role, right? And you see that, or you should see that as in a leadership role. You should see that. You say, hey, this guy's a high performer, and he's got some of those qualities that I'm looking for. The guys trust him, right? And he's calm under pressure. He can think tactically, right? And then you need to start prime that person even before they're ready to take on, a junior leadership role, a middle management role, as we would call that in business, right? You should start to be priming them for like, okay, so here's some leadership classes you can take, or, I've got this problem. How would you deal with it, right? And then also as you advance those people, you need to be showing them the job that you're doing, so they understand, okay, here's what's required. Here's the paperwork I need to be doing. Here's the, both through example without directly saying it, but then also, one of the frustrations that I've had with leaders in the past is that, and not specifically here, I just mean in general, is that they don't take the next guy under their wing and be like, hey, let me show you how this computer system works. Or let me show you, like, yeah, you don't have to use it today, but like, let me give you an orientation to like kind of some of the things that I'm doing.
So
and
that when they step up, it's not their first time seeing
the conversations that I'm having,
things, all of these different systems and tactics.
And sometimes I can be introduction to people, right? Like, hey, I want you to meet so-and-so. I work with them a lot on this project, or, this company, I deal with them a lot on, gear replacement, or, funding, or whatever it is. And so you should be constantly trying to involve the folks around you in helping them grow, both technically, but also tactically, both in your in your business environment, whether that's the fire service or whether that's,
Right.
larger business.
And it's cyclical because, again, these positions are all elected, including the officers. So everybody, everybody's watching here. The membership is watching, like, okay, what are the traits of this person? What are the skills of this person? How are they performing? And then, that cycle goes on and on until it comes up time for an election, and people are watching, the performance outcomes and those things. And I think that's especially important in a volunteer department, or especially an elected volunteer department, because, constantly growing those skills, again, is not going to hurt anything. That's just going to give it more options for better.
And I think there's some advantages and disadvantages to that system. One of the advantages of that system is that, you are directly holding your leadership team accountable. But one of the disadvantages of that is that sometimes part of being a good leader is making unpopular decisions. And, sometimes for the good of the organization or for some legal technical reason, you have to make a decision that nobody really likes, maybe not even you. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to do that. And so, those elections, I haven't seen it here so much, but some volunteer organizations, right, can become a problem, right, where you don't have the job security, right, as the leadership team to make unpopular decisions. But the benefit of that is that your decisions are being watched and scrutinized.
Yes.
And you're being held accountable to being a good leader.
Right. And I think that you've built a nice, at least from an observation standpoint, I think you've built a nice culture where we are valuing skills and we are trying to build those, and everybody's trying to build them. And now I think the motivation is like not only internal, but also like your brothers expect that of you, your brothers and sisters expect that of you. And one thing I just want to touch on that's different on my end of things is, you, I think, obviously have to deal with a lot of social interactions here. Your social interactions are different than mine because you deal with mostly men and mostly very tactical oriented men. And I'm dealing with, the community and children and, mothers and wives and also brothers and cousins and all those people too, but more broadly a community sense. So that having those social skills on my end has been a learning curve because I'm new to this community and we're a rural department here. And I didn't grow up in a rural area. So that was a learning curve where I've been trying to expand my skills, talk to people, listen, critically listening to, what my membership wants and needs, and being able to facilitate those things.
Yeah, and I think that is a big difference in our role. We have a saying here for our firemen: "Leave your feelings in the truck," and meaning that we have a little more of a military like culture where sometimes things just have to get done. Not saying that you get to be a jerk as the chief, but sometimes the orders are the orders, and we can talk about it later. We can have those discussions, and we do. But sometimes the order has to come down from the top, saying this is what we're doing and how we're doing it because of whatever. But the reasoning can't really be right now, right?
Right.
And so I have a little easier job there, at least as far as the emotional intelligence, which is good because that's not one of my strong suits.
I would disagree.
So
I think that you're constantly using that skill. I think you.
I'm
Just,
constantly
I think
I'm
you're
constantly
looking at
working
it
on that skill.
differently,
Not
but you
I don't know that
actually,
I'm
you're a
doing
lot better.
it super well.
From what I've witnessed, you do that a lot better than I think you give yourself credit for, and you're constantly doing it. But to the last point, you talked about how this is our structure here, at least on the operations standpoint, it's very military-esque. And one of the criticisms of the skills approach theory is that it's super broad and it's super, all the studies, I think, have really come out of like military type settings. So this structure works in this setting. So looking at it from building skills, it's natural. It jives, all of these theories jive with what's happening here because it's very similar to military-like organizations. And I think that the fact that it's a broad theory isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's not going to give you a roadmap on how to be a leader, but it gives you the flexibility of what's right for your organization and how to build and grow under, your vision as chief and what your membership needs. So I think it's a criticism because it's not hard and fast, black and white, but I think that it's actually got a lot of good suggestions.
Well, and I would double down on that and say, a lot of great leaders come out of the military. A lot of great leaders come out of paramilitary organizations like the fire service. And presidents have had military service or officers in the military. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have been. And I think the broadness criticism is fair. It's a fair criticism, but you also, there is no one way to build a good leader, right? You say, okay, leadership domains of competence are like any other domain of competence. And you say, okay, I'm good at these things and I'm weak at these things and I'm weak at these things. So to say but your skill set might be I'm weak at these things, great at these things, and weak at, in the middle of these things. And so there is no one way to do that, right? We all have our strengths and our weaknesses.
Right.
And I think good leadership training in this skills based approach would be like, we need to find what areas of good leadership you're weak in and grow those, encourage the ones you're strong in, and figure out, if your emotional intelligence is low, some strategies to help you get better at that, right? If you're emotionally reacting to things often, strategies to do better at that as a leader. And I think that's where the criticism that's too broad is because it's, as a generalized theory, there is no one way to do this, right? It would be very dependent on who you're growing, right, and what their individual skill sets are. But I think there's enough evidence out there that it works. Our military, I think, certainly believes that it works. Our fire service uses a very similar, and across the country, paid or volunteer, uses a similar approach to leadership, and I think it definitely does help grow and maintain the growth of your leadership team.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of bring this all full circle, if you have someone who's got these individual attributes of motivation, willingness to serve and lead, then this skills-based approach kind of gives them, it's less overwhelming because it allows you to, like, maybe I'm not going to be good at this today, but this doesn't mean, like, just because I wasn't born with this skill doesn't mean I can't grow this skill. And I think that's great.
And I think it also establishes a growth mindset. And a lot of our culture today doesn't have a growth mindset. We expect to be good at things. And that's just not how the world works.
Sure.
So looking at that as I need to root out my weaknesses, embrace my weaknesses, and root them out and get better is a far better tactic long term than, oh, I'm either a great leader or I'm not a great leader, right? Or some other theory. And so I think this is, if you start down that skills pathway, it's almost like a competency checklist that you never finish.
Right.
There's
I
always
agree.
something you get better
Always.
at, and you say, okay, hey, I'm doing a lot better in this, emotional intelligence area, or my tactical vision, or whatever I'm trying to grow in myself. I'm not there yet, but I'm growing it, and I'm going to keep growing it. I'm going to keep finding you'll do something. You go,
Yeah.
that wasn't very smart of me. I didn't do very well. And next time I try to do a little better. And I think that growth mindset also is an important attribute of a good leader, that you have to constantly be challenging yourself to grow.
And if you hit the end of that competency checklist, I think it might be right about time to retire.
Yeah, I think very few
If you
people have
think
done
that
that.
If
Yeah.
you think that you've hit the end, it's probably time for you to retire and move on, or whatever. But so I think that covers everything that we were wanting to go over today with the skills approach theory to leadership. If you guys have any questions, let us know. And thank you again, Chief Hoffman, for being with us tonight and sharing your experiences and your insight. That was all very wonderful and very much aligned with what we were looking at today. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
See you next time.